Okay, it is 12:25. We are live. We are testing. Hi, everybody who is joining us. We are so excited for today's one-on-one. Just hang on tight as we get settled in. Grab your water, your tea. Get settled. This is your lunch break. Grab your food. We have a great conversation today. We're just gonna work on some tech here. So, welcome everyone. We do have live captioning as well.
Well, it's 12:30. I always like to start my class, everything on time. So I think we can start, right, Moises? I think we can all start. Hi.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. My name's Ada Jen, and I'm the Education and Outreach Specialist for Campus Advocacy Network. Wow, I'm so excited. This is the last one-on-one with Ken and GSC for the year, and every second Wednesday of the month. And gosh, I always look forward to working with my, well, I'll call Moises my work husband, work partner now. We have struggled with difficulties, anxiety, pressure, and everything. I'm so excited. Thank you so much for being here. Moises, take it over.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. You're like the second spouse that I work spouse in my UIC history. Welcome, everybody. My name is Moises Villada. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I am the associate director at UIC's Gender and Sexuality Center. I am so excited for our one-on-one. As Ada mentioned, this is a collaboration. It's an initiative to really come together and get to know staff and faculty, their journeys, to help inspire us, but also get to know us, go a little bit deeper and be vulnerable for 30 minutes out of our lunchtime. So we are so excited today to have our special guest, Dr. Kishonna L. Welcome, Dr. Gray. Want to say hello and then I'll introduce you formally?
Hello, everyone. So I'm so honored to be here. I'm so excited. I hold you all in high regard and esteem. Y'all make my life. I'm thinking about anytime I'm just walking through BSB, which I feel like I haven't done like in years, right? Like,
Yes.
the joy, the smile, the realness, the love, the hugs that, you all show, like folks, like it's felt. I want to make sure to let y'all know that.
Oh, thank you so much, Kishonna. And it's been a long time since we've been in the same space, but your energy and spirit has definitely stayed with me. We would bump into each other, everybody in the halls, and just have a moment, to just be together in communities. So that's what we miss. But I'm glad we can have this space to come together and for others to get to know you a little bit more. So let me introduce you a little bit. Dr. Kishonna L. Gray is an assistant professor in the Department of Communication and Gender Women's Studies at UIC. She's an interdisciplinary, intersectional digital media scholar whose areas of research include identity, performance, and online environments, embodied deviance, cultural production, video games, and Black cyberfeminism. Some of her books include Intersectional Tech, Black Users in Digital Gaming, Race, Gender, and Deviance in Xbox Live, as well as a co-editor for 2 volumes, Feminism in Play and Woke Gaming. We are so excited to have you here, truly. So welcome.
Thank you.
And let's have a conversation. Ada, take it away.
Wonderful, Kishonna. So every time I got to meet somebody new, so I'm so excited to have this opportunity to get to know you better. And we usually start out, all the interview, this question, what were you like in college? However, you can take it back to kindergarten, elementary school, anywhere you want. But what were you like as a student? It can be back in college, high school.
Yeah.
Up to you.
So I'm gonna take it to college, right? Because I think that college was probably like the first time that I was actually able to be like my real self, right? And I mean that, like if I could show you, I'm gonna show you pictures like one day. But I was like full on stud, like, and a lot of people, outside of our queer community might not know what that even means. But I was like, wear Jordans and jerseys and fitted hats, like full on stud, and I think there was a lot of me like coming to like, figure out like who I am, and especially, and I came up from like a really religious like background. So like I wasn't out, like when I was like younger, and then I didn't know like all the terminology. So either you was like, I heard like the word like bulldogger a lot, like especially like used like in the Black community or whatever, but there was no conception of like bisexual or like pansexual, like things like that. So college just gave me like the freedom to really just like explore different aspects of my identity and connect with like different people, that I would have never connected with. And I also, listen, I grew up in small town Kentucky, rural Kentucky. Like, as you imagine, I mean, like y'all can just like imagine that experience. There was no community, right? And so I think that's one of the reasons why, I think I fell in love with the digital and online spaces and online communities like early on. Like, I was in all of the chat rooms and stuff like that. MySpace, Black Planet, Mi Gente, I was like in all of those spaces, like whenever I was like, growing, especially like in high school and stuff. And so, and also I was not like a brainiac. I hated school. Like I hated school. Like I love telling like my students this. I failed a lot of classes in undergrad. I was partying. I was having like a good time. I was living my best life, right? I changed my major because I was just really like living free and wild. Now you also have to like understand. Now I say I hated school. I think it was just hard for me. Right. School never really like came easy that it did like a lot of other people. So I've always had to like work hard, like on, comprehension kind of stuff, like understanding, like, I read something, like, I'm like, do I actually like get this? And I didn't know if like just language was like inaccessible or if there were like other things happening there. I never really like, figured that out. But I was like, you know what, I think it was like the moment whenever I read Bell Hooks. I read Bell Hooks. I'm like, this talks to me. Like I get everything this person's saying, So I just chalked it up as like, they were just, having me read stuff that I just didn't care about. And so I wasn't really like engaged, but whenever I like discovered like Black feminism and, all that kind of, that really like spoke to me. And I was like, okay, this is speaking, some of my language here. But I was, I think when I didn't start taking school serious until my scholarship was about to run out. So I was there, I had a scholarship, I did good enough like to get a scholarship. So I only had 4 years. They weren't going to extend it past that. So I had to like really hustle to like catch up. And then I picked a major I was a criminal justice major. Like, I'm first generation. I didn't know what any of that stuff meant. I just picked the thing that was easiest and was going to let me graduate on time. Right. Now, so it's an interesting story how I got here. There was one of my professors in the criminal justice department. He kind of like took me under his wing. He like mentored me and stuff. And he was like, Kishonna, you write pretty well. Like, I like, what you're saying and, what you're talking about here. Have you considered graduate school? And I was like, no, I have never considered graduate school. I didn't know what graduate school was. Like, I had no idea what a master's degree was. Like, I didn't know what any of that meant. So he sent me like a link. He was like, well, Kishonna, you just apply and, just see if you get in. I was like, okay. Like, I went like straight, like, I've always loved librarians, so I went straight to the librarian, like on campus. I'm like, can you tell me what this means? And so she just kind of like explained what graduate school meant, like the path, because I was embarrassed, to ask, because I'm like, he thinks something more of me than what I actually am, so I went and like, figured that out. And so, and so I applied, I got in. That's why I got my master's degree in criminal justice again. Because like I said, I had no idea about, what the pathways were like to get to places. Right. And then it was like in that moment, during graduate school, Hurricane Katrina happened. So it was like 2005. And I was just, like most of us, we're watching this stuff, just pour like out on our TV screens and seeing the news. And like, we were all like collectively like impacted, especially marginalized and minoritized folks. We were all like collectively like impacted, seeing what was pouring out like on our screens. And then I was like, and then when I was learning about research and studying, I was like, I want to study that. I was really fascinated with how, folks who were like displaced by Katrina were like connecting with each other in the comment section of like news articles and stuff. And how, like a lot of folks were using like social media, like at the time, like, with MySpace, saying I'm looking for somebody. They said they went to Houston, they said they were sent here. They said they were sent here, trying to find people like, with social media. And that kind of like sparked my interest in like online communities and how like people like build communities. And I'm so sorry. I'm long-winded. I'm so sorry. It's like so much. I don't know why y'all started with this open ended.
We love it.
Kishonna, I mean, think about it. If you talk more, then that reduces our responsibility. So not really. I love that. I love that.
Okay,
We
yes,
love it.
yes, ma'am. Okay, so right when I was so I did that project like in my master's program. I didn't do a thesis though, because that was another time where I didn't realize what was really like involved with a thesis. I didn't know what a thesis meant, and I didn't realize it was like a whole project. But once I learned that, I realized I was gonna have to like stay like beyond 2 years, and I didn't want to stay more than 2 years. I was ready to get out, and so I just did the test option. So a lot of people don't realize that I don't have a thesis. And a thesis is not required. You know, some people think that you have to have a thesis in order to like go get like a PhD or whatever. That's not the case at all. But it was after that moment that I'm like, all right, let me try to find a job. I was gonna go back home and work. I was gonna be like a CO in the local jail. Like I was gonna be a corrections officer. Like that's really what I was thinking. The extent, like I didn't know that the master's degree was prepping me for like a research life or whatever. But I couldn't find a job. The only reason why I'm here today is because there were no job openings, or I didn't get a job whenever I tried to apply, like after my master's degree. And the only other pathway that was open, because I applied to PhD programs too, you know, because a lot of folks in my cohort, they were doing the same thing. So they were like, you're trying to apply to PhD programs. I'm like, okay, you know, so I applied. I didn't think anything of that. You know, I wasn't, you know, making like the connections. But whenever I didn't have a job, I'm like, well, I got to do something, you know? So I was like, all right, well, let me do this PhD. And so I had, I got accepted to a couple programs, not all the programs that I wanted, you know, because my GRE scores were terrible. Like I said, I don't test well. Like on my ACT, I think the first time I took the ACT, I got like a 14. The next time I got a 17, like awful scores. The GRE, I got like below minimum, but I could write, you know. I'm like, listen, that I'm not gonna let that define me who I am. I'm like, I can still do that, right? I can still make it. But it was between IU, Indiana University. I was going to do their PhD in criminal justice, and I also got into ASU, the Justice Studies program. Now I picked ASU because the time that I visited Indiana, it was cold, and I didn't want to be cold. And so that's the only. Listen, that's the extent of my thinking.
It's real.
So I went to ASU because it was nice and pretty. I love the palm trees. I think I probably had never seen like a palm tree before, you know. So I was like, well, oh my God, it's a Phoenix. I'm gonna see what this Phoenix life is like. So, you know, I went there, you know, and then, you know, the rest is like, you know, the rest is kind of history. You know, you can kind of see who I am, like from my CV or whatever. So that's who I am.
That's amazing. First of all, you have brought it all in, like boom, 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 all these really important themes, right? And what I'm appreciating about the way you're being so honest and candid and vulnerable is because you are talking about the like you started off with identity and identities, right? And part of our work is linked to that, right? Like and how that has such an impact in the way we are experiencing the world and how all these other opportunities show up or don't show up, right? But you're also talking about these many different systemic things, right? Like not knowing these resources or like the navigating systems, which is a lot of what we personally do, but also our students are doing, right? So it's all of these beautiful elements. And I'm really curious at what's coming up for me right now is like, well, and the other important thing that I want to name is community. Because sometimes, right, well, that's another big theme. Like sometimes physical spaces are now where community can be, right? It's also this online virtual space. And now we're in virtual space, right? So what's coming up for me is, as you're sharing all of these beautiful moments in your journey, is how did you manage to work through all of these difficult systems? What kept you going, or what kept you moving forward? What made you kept taking a risk?
Ooh, I love that question. Because I think a lot of times, like when you're in the moments, you aren't thinking about it, right? And you're just kind of like reacting and like moving and just responding to the stimuli in your environment, right? You know, like, okay, there's a barrier here. All right, I'm gonna just go around that. Okay, you're gonna close that door. I'm gonna come through the window. You know, and I think it's probably really like a testament to, you know, I'm thinking about like my mom. You know, so she's been incarcerated, you know, like a lot of her life, you know, been institutionalized. You know, she suffers from co-occurring disorders. So, you know, that means for folks who don't know, you know, she suffers from like substance abuse, but also she has mental illness. So she's schizophrenic, depression, anxiety, you know, like all that stuff. But she was a woman that never quit a single thing, right? You know, she was going to try it despite all the barriers and obstacles, you know, and then even doing like things like impossible, all the things that she might dream up wasn't you know, she said she was going to like move to like Paris. I'm like, oh, we ain't moving to Paris. But in her mind, she was like, we are really going to do this. And so it was just like her confidence, you know, to just be like, I can dream it, I can do it. And I think I really like, you know, took on like a lot of that, you know, just seeing that, you know, a lot of people like laugh at her, you know, a lot of people dismiss her, say, oh, that's just Faye. She's talking crazy again. It's just her. But, you know, I guess I was so like impressionable as a child. I'm like, you know what, she actually thinks this can happen. And I guess I was just really inspired by the process of like her thinking of like, you know, if you can dream it, you can do it. And that's really like what she like relayed like down to me. And I think that's that kind of like what drives and influences me like so much, you know. So when you think about all the institutional barriers and all the structural barriers, like I know that those things are there, right? But I'm going to figure out a way. I'm going to play the game as much as I need to play it, right? I'm going to get all the things that I need, you know. And so I'm going to make sure just to get somebody just posted on my Twitter page that meme from Players Club, use what you got to get what you want, or something like that, you know, even though, you know, they're talking about a different kind of context, you know, of what you're using. But, you know, I think, you know, the same thing like applies, right? You know, so I'm not, you know, my talents are limited, you know, my resources are limited. So I'm like, okay, so, you know, I'm a use, like, for instance, like white guilt. White folks want to feel bad for me and, you know, give me a scholarship, give me money. I'm gonna let them do that. You want to have like, I know some people are like, you know, you don't take those kinds of things, don't take those kind of favors, but you know, I will take a white, you can white savior me all day. If white folks want to save me, go right ahead. Because then what I'm going to do is I'm going to then channel a lot of that resources and those things like to the people that are like, I'm gonna lift them up too. I'm gonna make sure to use that to bring like other folks along and, you know, mention people's names and say, hey, well, this person's doing that, or, you know, this is happening, you know. So I always want to, you know, I feel like I'm like a maybe like a bridge, you know, to like folks, whereas, you know, I don't have that many privileges, but the ones that I got, especially that institutional privilege, you know, I want to use like, you know, for the benefit of like other folks. So if I can find money and funds and like resources, you know, to help like people that need it, you know, I'm going to do that, you know. So I don't mind playing like an academic game. You know, people are like, Kishonna, how are you happy? You know, how are you always, you know, joyous? I'm like, I think about the folks who have like less than me. I'm like, why do I have to be upset and complain? It would just be just because, you know, maybe because I don't have tenure yet, or, you know, because I'm not getting all the things that I think I need, or because like, I mean, there's no need for me to be like upset. And I guess that's also true because a lot of people I speak to come from like a lot of privilege. And the fact that I don't, you know, what I've seen like from my upbringing and everything, I'm like, I can be back in that trailer like with nothing, you know, but I'm here and I have these things. So I'm going to make the best of like the opportunities and stuff that I have. But also just to make sure that I stay connected to like the real people and real folks and real experiences to make sure that I'm like, okay, how can I help them and how can I do that? I hope that kind of answered your question on that. So that's kind of how I felt like responding to that, like at the time. Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, absolutely. One question that I found really, you know, Kishonna, when you're talking about in college, you failed classes, that kind of bring me back this issue because the success in college doesn't always predict your success in life, right? And I was like that in college as well. I mean, I didn't make straight A's. I was not particularly good. I mean, I was good in something. But my curiosity, you know, you're now a confident person yourself, and how do you? I want you to tap into that spirit of resilience, that strength. Yeah. How do you, right, become somebody? And I think this is really important for a lot of students who have self-doubt, right? Yep. Anxiety, frustration, because they don't make straight A's, because they are not doing as good, and they feel that what they're doing in college tell their, you know, it's a prediction of their whole life. And how do you convince, in some way, you have to convince yourself that you're worthy, you can do this, despite the evidence, right? How did you dig into that, right? Dig deep into your own strength. How do you convince yourself that you will be somebody, you can do this? I'm curious about how that internal process.
Absolutely. I think a lot of that, it's been like a journey, right? You know, so it's not, you know, I didn't always, you know, have it. And I wasn't like always like this confident, like as a person, right? But I realized what I had to do was detach myself from white expectations. You know, I had to detach myself from what like people around me were like saying was like the metric and like the litmus test of what it means to be successful, right? You know, because if I were to go by where like a lot of, especially my white peers, you know, going like through this process, you know, I was like, a lot of times I'm the only person of color in a lot of spaces. And I'm hearing, you know, so they are kind of like, feeding me like their own beliefs and valuation systems, right? And so like a lot of things, it's just that personal individual success. So I'm like, okay, well, yeah, okay, so I gotta publish. Okay, I can do that. I gotta make sure I have these books. I gotta make sure I have these things and have like those individual like metrics of success. But then I also thought, I'm like, well, how is this benefiting like the goal of transformation and liberation? And like, like I've got that radical thinking like in my mind as well, that I'm always connected to the communal and the collective. And I'm just like, how's this book gonna benefit like these folks who ain't got no food or ain't got no place to stay, or my incarcerated, family members, and like, how is this like benefiting them, right? So then I had to like transform like my thinking like around that. I really had to untether, from white masculine capitalist hetero patriarchal supremacy, all the thing, all that, right? I had to like really like detach from that. And then I think that was like a freeing process. Like I felt free from that when I wasn't bound to those like that prescriptive, kind of like formula, right? And then I think after that, like so much stuff just started to come in like more naturally. Like, so for instance, like it's not hard for me. Like writing is not difficult. It's not hard because I'm not waiting for somebody else to say, okay, Kishonna, this is great. We approve this. I could care less. So I'm writing now, I'm writing for the communities, because I'm making their experiences like legible, to like academic spaces, which I really could care less about that too, because I could care less what academia thinks about them. But I'm like, these spaces matter. These online communities matter, gaming matters, what these young folks, what these young Black and brown kids are doing in these spaces is like really dope. And I think y'all should know about it, to support them. And so, I've translated a lot of that work to say, what they're doing can translate like to STEM careers, so I do have to do like a lot of that finessing kind of language, like to, but I only do that to like a certain extent, right? I only do that to make sure that I support the folks. So if there are some, if I want to get these kids into school, right? I'm big about, making sure, like black kids get into college and stay in college and make it through. Like, so I'm big about like that retention. Like, what does that look like? How can I like support all those kinds of things? But I think it was really like that moment when I realized that, my mama told me she was proud of me a long time ago. So I've already succeeded. I've already made it. So there's nothing else. So there's no loss. Like there is nothing like, if I don't get tenure, that's not a loss for me. That's a loss for y'all. That's a loss for the institution that decided not to tenure me. If I don't get promoted, if I don't get the accolades, if I don't get the grant, that's a loss for y'all, because y'all could have realized how dope these young folks are like doing this stuff in this space, or how dope these women are like in this space, or how dope these trans folks are like doing this stuff, like despite of like everything that's like happening like around them. So I really just reframe my thought. I'm like, well, y'all missing out, so I don't even like whenever I get like rejections and things like that. Like, I mean, this could just be, my mama teaching me just to be, just that crazy person, right? I'm like, because she's like, that none of that matters. What matters is how you feel and how you're connected to like, your communities and your people, making sure that, they have that they feel that love from you, and they see that you care about them. Like that's what really like matters, So I really just did that internal kind of thing and started doing like an internal focus, like on the communal and like the collective and staying connected. Like really, academia have us like all messed up. I'm thinking about do y'all remember that thread that was happening on, was it Black in the Ivory Tower? Like a few months ago, there was like a whole thread of, like Black folks and other like folks of color that were just talking about like their experience in like academia, like all the micro and macro aggressions, all like the real stuff that happens to us, that y'all know all about that what we experience in academia. And then I was thinking, I was like, I was going to share, because I have like tons of stories. And I was like, you know what? I'm first off, we're going to be talking to ourselves, because, it's nothing, me saying all this stuff is nothing new for like all y'all. But then I was like, we really have to like disconnect ourselves from these spaces that could care less about us. If they really don't want us here, they would kill us if they could. And they're trying to. Like, just think about like, all the, I'm thinking about the stress and the hustle of folks that, Meredith Clark, she calls it the tenure track hustle, right? Just think about how we contort ourselves to just fit like, within these metrics and these parameters. And when we do all that work and then they extend the goalposts, well, you need another book, you need some more articles, you need more of this, it's just not enough. You haven't done enough service, or you haven't done enough service that we care about, you're doing, like, and then we're just really, breaking our bags, to really figure out ways to make the institution happy, really, to make like whiteness happy. And I think that's really like to a detriment, right? early on in my work, I was big about doing like a lot of, I guess, kind of like whiteness studies, especially like in online spaces, to try to figure out, why they're so toxic, to try to figure out the why of the sexism and the racism, like all that stuff, right? So I was like, in order to figure that out, then, I have to like be in these very white spaces. So I spent a lot of time, and I had a publication out of it. There's an article that said, dude, I'm not racist. That's what I called the article. But I'm like, why am I in these spaces, expending so much energy on these folks who could care less about what my reality and my existence is here? So that's where I really started to shift my focus and, started to, to pour my energy and my talents into, like the folks of color and the other minoritized folks, like in these online spaces, which is why I want to make sure my projects are hella Black, hella queer, like focusing like on, these perspectives that really, matter like the most,
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. We have 5 minutes left, and we could go on for hours with you. But here's what's coming up for me. And you mentioned your mother, and you parent, right? And so I'm just really curious about how that is manifesting for you now, right? Being on the other flip side of that. I know we only have a few minutes, but that comes up, and I think it's an important piece because one of the joys is seeing you in the space, right, with a little one. And so I just want to just bring that up and see what comes up for you as I ask that.
Oh my gosh. Being a parent is so dope, right? Now these structures and institutions don't make it easy. Like they don't make it easy for people who are, family focused and, because a lot of us, especially in our communities, we do so much elder care. We care about what's happening with our parents and grandparents. And, we care about our experiences of like the younger folks, like in our lives. And, these, I'm even thinking about, just during the pandemic, a lot of these institutions were just like, y'all can't be watching your kids while you're working. And we're like, who's going to watch our kids? So I'm really thinking about just all the times that I'm reminded about how these spaces really don't care. But I think it's important that, I've really created like this structure, so for instance, people always say, oh, I'm sure you're so stressed, Kishonna, I'm trying to parent during the pandemic. I'm like, we are actually good, because I don't care about grades. I don't care about those metrics. I don't care about the ways that you might try to assess and measure, how my kids are succeeding and thriving. They have joy every day. They can communicate their feelings when they're frustrated. They have space to communicate that. And like, if they don't, like, my one of my kids I didn't realize that the connection between like the stress of school was causing him to like wet himself. Right. And so whenever like I started homeschooling, and that just like, it stopped like immediately. And I'm like, I didn't even like realize the connection. And I felt bad. I'm like, I didn't realize it was stressing him out. But, he was like, well, you wanted me to do good in school. So I was just doing it. And I'm like, honey, no, I care about you. I don't care about them grades. I don't care about them fractions. Like, forget them fractions. Like, I care about you. I want to make sure like that you're doing okay. But I realized that there were some things that were tougher, and I needed to bring some things like back down, because he was stressed out because there were some basic blocks that he had missed. And I didn't even realize that. Right. I don't, time is running out. I'm so sorry. I'm going to stop now. But I love the communal parenting, like especially with the community that I'm in, especially like in gender and women's studies. I love that, I have spaces where, if I bring my kids to work, it's okay to bring them, and then that a lot of folks, especially for even a lot of my colleagues, they don't even have kids of their own, but, they realize, that that's like important. The other mothering is like, dear and near to them, so they have really just embraced, my kids and my family, as like, it's like their own. And so it's just been very beautiful. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for asking that.
Wow, absolutely. I mean, gosh, I'm so glad that Moises recommended you for this interview. I'm going to say this: a lot of what you say really resonated with me, particularly, when I resigned from my tenure position 5 years ago. One thing I asked myself: do I want to continue to invest in an institution that denies my existence? And that fundamentally is a question that I can devote my energy and talent and resources to spaces that are important to me. So I am so glad that I gained a comrade here at UIC campus, because everything you say, you almost made me cry. I'm like controlling myself. Gosh, this is so great. Gosh, we have 2 minutes left. Can you give one most important advice for our students? One advice, and then we're going to wrap it up. There's one advice.
I think probably the thing that I would impart to students is to trust yourself. You know what's best for you. You know what you need. If you need to take a break, if you need to, take a semester off, if you need to, focus more like on other things, like then you need to do that. Don't let other folks like dictate and dominate, the things that they think you should be doing. So trust yourself. Will be it.
Absolutely. Trust yourself, be your authentic yourself, pursue your passion. Thank you so much, Kishonna. This is the end. You close our series. This is so fantastic. Oh, I am so impressed with everything. So resonated with me, everything. You're going to make me cry after the interview. Moises, how do you feel?
I am honored. I am full. I feel that you are embodying everything you are not only saying, but vibing, we feel that. And whomever sees this, I know will have an impact in their lives, because authenticity, honesty, vulnerability, you've embodied that today in this small time. And so I'm grateful. Thank you for everything. And that's a wrap. Thank you for closing this academic year. First year we've done these conversations. You wrapped us up with a bang, and just grateful for your existence and for being part of this campus. So thank you.
Thank you. Kishonna, how do you feel? I usually like to close out with, how do you feel?
I feel beautiful. I feel amazing. I feel loved, and I thank you. I'm so glad to have this connection, and I can't wait to continue the relationship with you all. I'm so excited about that.
Absolutely. We're going to have to meet via Zoom separately. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
This is the end of our interview. Thank you so much. Until fall.
Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.
Bye.